Hello and welcome. We are back with the third series of Leading Tourism's Transition. And I'm really delighted to say that we're doing this series in partnership with Holibob. And joining me throughout the next 3 episodes, I have Craig Everett, the co-founder and CEO of Holibob. So welcome, Craig. It's great to be setting up this partnership with you. And we've got some really interesting topics coming up in the pipeline as we look at bookable experiences and why these are so important for us to prioritize and to really develop when we think about the destination and how we can really develop the ecosystem and the experience ecosystem. Why don't we start out by hearing a little bit more about Holibob and tell us a little bit about what you're looking forward to in this series.
Yep. Thank you very much, Nick, and thank you very much for all of your work to set up this podcast and this series. I think we've got some amazing guests lined up for the next few episodes, and we're looking forward to spending a bit more time unpacking some of these really interesting topics. Holibob has been on a mission for 5 or so years to connect travelers to incredible experiences and think about how technology can influence the traveler experience and help travelers to enjoy incredible things to do when they are traveling. Our mission is one of helping other consumer-facing travel businesses to help their consumers to enjoy incredible experiences. So we're really excited to be surrounded by such interesting and exciting guests and really get their opinions on not only how travel operates today, but how technology can obviously influence the future traveler experience and how they see technology impacting their own businesses and what travel of the future will look like. So thank you very much for having us, and we're looking forward to hearing more about the businesses and the guests that we have on through this series.
So you and I, Craig, are going to get to know each other very well over the next 3 episodes as we really dig deep with these fascinating perspectives that we've put together. I think it's safe to say that in each episode, we have a different perspective. And one of the things we've been really keen to do is have a destination, an industry, and an expert perspective. So obviously that will differ a little bit from episode to episode, but we've got some brilliant people lined up. And today's episode is all about sustainability. And that's why we framed it as impactful experiences, transforming tourism with purpose. So let's have a little look at who we have joining us today. I'm really pleased to welcome everybody to the podcast. It's great to see all of you spanning multiple time zones. So let's kick things off. Maybe I'll start, perhaps a little bit selfishly, but with someone I know very well, Annakaisa Ojala, or I think you prefer to just be called Anis. Annakaisa, you come with so much experience and you've really transcended the industry, especially working in setting up some really amazing product and experience concepts with your experience back at Finnair, more recently with Business Finland, and now as an independent consultant. So I think you can definitely give us the lay of the land when it comes to the challenges that we might face along the way. But I think also importantly, where purpose has a value when we think about bookable experiences and trying to scale that up and make that viable. We also have Patrick Melchior. He's Dutch and he's from the Aruba Tourism Authority. And I'm particularly excited to have Patrick joining us because Aruba Tourism Authority had a lot of success with a campaign, a concept, and an event. I guess, Patrick, you'll tell us a bit more, called Aruba Authentico. And this has won many awards. It's been widely recognized as something truly original. And I have to say, it also won awards at the Digital Tourism Think Tank's X Awards. So it's very well regarded. Craig, perhaps I'll invite you to introduce our next guest.
Yep, and I'm delighted or thrilled to introduce Sara King, who is the General Manager of Purpose for Intrepid Travel. Intrepid is globally recognized as one of the largest B Corps in the space, and Sara and her team shape how Intrepid go about maintaining their B Corp status. Intrepid achieved a score of 102.5 in their latest B Corp recertification, which is up 11.3 points on their previous score, and I'm sure Sara will have a lot to share about how they managed to do that. Sara leads the Intrepid's efforts in the areas like climate action, community empowerment, and ethical tourism, and she plays a vital role within Intrepid in ensuring that it lives up to its own values, whether that's through achieving carbon neutrality, supporting local communities, or driving initiatives that make travel more inclusive or regenerative. I'm sure Sara's going to have a huge amount to add in terms of our topic and our discussion today. It's been fantastic doing a bit more reading on Sara Sara, her role, and Intrepid more generally in the build up to this. So super excited to hear what she has to offer as part of this discussion. So thank you very much for joining us, Sara.
Okay, so today's podcast, we are going to jump into sustainability from the perspective of how we can really ramp up bookable experiences as a key driver to seeing growth in the tourism economy, but also supporting many of the other really important benefits that tourism brings, whether that's social benefits or being considerate and thinking about some of the environmental aspects around that. In today's podcast, we're going to be looking at how we can support local economies. We're also going to be looking at how we can manage tourism pressures. It's something that we hear a lot about. It's also something that comes regularly into mainstream media and can even have very negative perceptions for some destinations. We're also going to be thinking about how we can build trust through sustainable practices. So as we focus more and more on sustainability, it increasingly creates concerns around authenticity, transparency, and building that real sense of trust that we need between the communities we're supporting and benefiting, and of course also potential travelers. And then we're going to look at the role of technology in actually driving this forward. But perhaps before we do that, let's jump in and hear a little bit more about what everybody does. Let's go in the same order that we just introduced everybody and start off with Anis.
Thank you for inviting me here. This is one of my favorite topics, experiences, and especially discussing about travel tech and how digitalization can support local experiences. My background, as you said in the introduction, for the past 4 years, I've been working for Visit Finland, which is part of Business Finland organization, but we are a national tourism board. Maybe we have a bit wider role than national tourism boards in general. Visit Finland has super strong support function for the Finnish travel sector, with 3 main topics, which digitalization was on my desk. I ran a 4-year program for the travel sector, which was focusing on international growth for the experience companies, but travel sector in general. So we was in digitalization, e-commerce, digital distribution, everything digital when it comes to the travel sector. That's my experience with super small, medium, and micro-sized companies in Finland. I think this is a great topic because now I think the technology is there. It's mature enough that allows the experience companies to digitalize and go international and grow.
And indeed, I think the SMEs in our sector are often where we face the biggest challenges, and they're the stakeholders that we want to really support and lift them up more. But there are many challenges in that journey. So looking forward to jumping into that. Patrick, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yes. Hi. Thank you, Nick. I am the Destination Services Manager for the Aruba Tourism Authority. What that basically means is that I am responsible for the management side and the product development side of our DMMO, Destination Marketing and Management Organization for the island. I think we can state that Aruba is one of the bigger brands, if not one of the biggest brands in tourism. There's an insanely high demand still for our beautiful island. And if you imagine that we are merely 120,000 in population, and our tourism spans almost 2 million yearly, which consists of both cruise as well as stayover tourism. And it's basically my role for the past 9 years or so to further develop and create the right product and the right experiences, for that matter, to keep the island interested or interesting to our travelers and visitors. We say guests now because we feel there's a shift going on that we need to get on board with. And we don't speak to sustainability, but more so to responsible tourism and eventually in regenerative tourism, because we've seen obviously the impact that visitation has on a broader scale. It's not only in Aruba, but many other countries and destinations in the world. And we are definitely working on a shift on how we can better manage that.
Very interesting. So I think we'll definitely like to see what that looks like in practice as we dive in a little deeper. And how about yourself, Sara? Before we started the recording today, you were telling me about your interesting start at Intrepid. So how has your journey been?
That's right. Yes, I've been in Intrepid for 5 years now, starting at the beginning of COVID, which wasn't ideal, but it's been a fantastic journey of rebounding from that period and really trying to build back better as a business. We have a mission in the business to create positive change through the joy of travel. And it's really my job and privilege to help the business do that. So really closely with many other functions across the business. So our product manager and brand and our DMCs. So we're a vertically integrated business and we build and operate a lot of our product in our destinations. So we have an enormous opportunity to create positive impact through that. I've been working in this space for a long time and really seen when tourism is done right, it can actually really empower communities. It can be inclusive, impactful tool for creating change. So that's really what drives me in my job.
So I guess it's probably safe to say that Craig and I are both two people who come with a deep passion for technology and are always hotly pursuing the latest developments and thinking about how they can benefit both the work that we do, but of course the industry as well. How do you guys see this opportunity and maybe some of the challenges as well? So Sara, one of the things that must be quite difficult when you've got very clearly defined commercial objectives is finding that balance between those icons, those attractions, those experiences which really create a strong draw and people love and they already know, versus trying to make sure you spread the value of tourism, that you bring the many small operators that may be harder to find or harder to discover into the picture.
Yeah, it is definitely a challenge. And I think it's a balance, right? Because we are a commercial business. There is the demand there for those attractions. And so you have to incorporate that into your product. But I think the way that we try and approach that is to really think about it in quite a conscious way. So having our DMCs within our business, we have a really unique local perspective that gets considered into our product design. And I think that really helps us to do things a little bit differently. We might still take people to the Great Wall, but it'll be maybe at dawn before the crowds get there. Or it might be Kyoto in our Japan trips. We might stay outside the city rather than within the city to disperse that impact. So it's really about thinking about things a little bit differently. And then the power we have as well through our local guides on our trips helps us tell that story to our customers as well around why we are doing things a little bit differently. So I think there's many levers you can pull to try and reduce that pressure in destinations if you're open to being a bit more conscious about your product design.
Sara, as I mentioned in the introduction, Intrepid is a certified B Corp, and I'm sure like a lot of our listeners have heard what a B Corp is, but I'd love to hear from you, what does it mean to be a B Corp from Intrepid's point of view, and following on from Nick's question about you're a commercial entity and how does that interact with the concept of being a B Corp?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think that the essence of B Corp is really that the company really tries to consider their stakeholders. So that includes the customers, it includes the planet or the environment, the communities that we visit in, the way we govern as a business. And it's really trying to consider all those factors within your decision making rather than just be short-term, entirely profit-driven. It's thinking about those impacts that you're creating across those different areas in your decision making. And it can get really complicated sometimes, right? Because they can be contradictory, or we can create positive impacts in some areas and negative impacts in others. But I think the important thing, we always try and drive that discussion and drive that consideration. Over 10 years ago, we decided to remove elephant rides on our Thailand trips. And we knew that was going to have a direct commercial impact potentially, but we decided to take that decision anyway based on the research we had at the time. And so that's something that actually ended up engaging our customers more than detracting them. But I think that's an example of sometimes you've got to make decisions that potentially have an impact on the bottom line, but it might have positive impacts in other ways as well. So it's a constant evolution and a constant approach where we're really trying to make these decisions in a way that does consider all these stakeholders.
Yeah.
It's really interesting, especially to see how B Corp is also something that's really become a very widely recognized certification or accreditation that really resonates with consumers. I guess that effort really pays off when you actually see we can create this transparency, we can show what purpose means, it's measured and it's fully set out, and that does build a sense of trust. So definitely be keen to learn a bit more about that. But I think moving over to Patrick, because Sara talked a lot about that need for partnership in that B Corp journey. With the work that you do, you need to build a lot of trust with stakeholders in the destination. They need to also trust that you have the right understanding of how to develop the destination from a sustainability perspective, but also translate that to potential visitors in a way that's respectful. Tell us a little bit about the process of setting up Authentico Aruba and how you actually managed to get all of the participating businesses behind you on that.
The great thing in that sense is that we are a very small community. I mentioned 120,000 that actually live here. So that has some perks. Everybody knows everybody, and especially from a perspective of who's in the industry, who leads, and who is an important stakeholder for these types of endeavors. And to us, it's very important that our direction is recognized by everyone. So we are in constant communication with all of the partners on a very wide scale, a very broad scale. So the hotels, the restaurants, the business owners, even retail, government, obviously, and many other stakeholders in order to align on our strategies. So when talking about, for example, the experience of Authentico, we also decided from that perspective, we need something different. We need something new. We've done the research. We've created a niche framework. We wanted to focus a little bit more on those smaller, exclusive, authentic experiences that everybody's talking about, but we really do not necessarily have. And one of the aspects that was pulled out was culinary. And why culinary? Because the research showcased that our culinary scene was very diverse. We have over 100 nationalities living here. So all of those nationalities brought some form of culinary experience into the island. And we found a way to come together on that and say, okay, so what is the next step that we need to actually showcase that we are very authentic?
And how did the businesses actually then develop those experiences to really make up that proposition? I know there's some real nuggets in there that really go right back to the kind of origins of the food and culture and really bring out certain educational and culturally rich aspects of the destination, which can easily be overlooked.
Yeah, we decided that after the research and the identification of the fact that we needed a culinary event, because the research basically told us that, we went ahead and said, okay, so we need all of the stakeholders that are closely involved in on this. So we had multiple meetings with all of the restaurant partners, all of the hotels, and trying to mold that experience. How do we get to showcase that we are truly, A, on one side, authentic, but B, how do we showcase all of that diversity from the 100 plus nationalities? And make sure that it's driven by locals, because we wanted the buy-in from our local population. Our community needs to say, this is who we are. And then obviously, when we showcase this in such a way that visitors would buy in as well and say, hey, this is interesting. Aruba has a very diverse culinary scene. We should go because of the culinary aspects of what they portray and what they offer. And there's also the beach, and there's a beautiful hospitality drive that we have here. So a shift in the way of thinking from that perspective.
Patrick, in your introduction, you said you don't refer to sustainable tourism. You talk about responsible tourism and then to regenerative tourism. Yeah. So could you just talk a bit more about exactly how that reflects on how you think about your role in building these campaigns?
Obviously, sustainability is on everybody's minds. And in marketing terms, that is a very popular word. Everybody uses it. But what are we truly doing? There's a lot of greenwashing going around. Maybe it's not something that we should say out loud, but it happens a lot. So we need to be truly authentic to our promise to our destinations. I heard Sara speak about when are you visiting certain locations? Why would you do that? Why would you take out elephant rides? We have an issue, for example, that our nature is being affected by ATV, UTV being used a lot, maybe over the top. How do you manage that?
That is really interesting nonetheless. Yeah. I think we're all trying to drive more people to go and visit and travel and experience all the amazing things, whether it's cultural, whether it's scenic, or whether it's really unique experiences that have been specifically designed for tourism.
Correct. So coming back to Craig's question about responsible regenerative, which is a tongue twister, I understand. Yeah. Sustainability is on everybody's minds. But how about you take it a step further into responsible tourism? What is responsible? And I thought Sarah's examples were really on point to that. Responsibility is, okay, take people off of those elephants. Do not visit the Great Wall of China at certain times of the day. do not visit certain destinations maybe, or come back another year. How much is enough? How much can we responsibly do? And that's where responsible comes in, to make sure that the destination and the communities in those destinations are not negatively affected. So it's not necessarily only about sustainability anymore, but it's also about being responsible. What are you doing as a destination and as partners in general to protect that sustainability and be responsible? Unfortunately, many destinations have been negatively impacted by visitation. What do you do to regenerate? How can you come back being authentic, the authentic destination that people chose to visit all of those years? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it's quite interesting from what you have said, Patrick, and what Sara said. It feels like a cultural shift in terms of the mindset that you're trying to change within your organizations and the ecosystems that you're trying to build and create. And Intrepid obviously acting as a commercial entity, and what you're doing at Visit Aruba in terms of trying to think about how you do creation of product and try and change the culture. And I think that leads quite nicely to Anis in terms of what you talked about you were doing at Business Finland around educating SMEs and trying to build up that digitization and their ability to distribute. And how much does that sustainability, responsibility elements that Sara and Patrick have talked about come into your curriculum? Because I guess it's an education for a lot of these businesses. And how do you think about those elements when you're thinking about encouraging distribution or trying to help your experience providers within Finland to distribute and sell to these different audiences?
Yeah, when we were looking at the Finnish travel sector and the opportunities to grow, now there is, as we all know, quite a huge momentum for the Nordic destinations. Finland is a unique destination. We are an Arctic nature destination. We're not overcrowded at all, and we want to keep it that way. And the core strategic focus of Visit Finland is that Finland wants to be the most sustainable destination in the world, which is a fantastic goal, and we're in a good way going there. I think digitalization and growth is a sustainability topic as well, especially as I already mentioned in the beginning, the small and micro businesses are extremely important for the destination. Why is that? Of course, the reasons to travel to Finland is not big resort or Disneyland type of activities. We don't have that at all. The reasons to travel to Finland are to experience the Arctic nature, to experience the extreme coldness and darkness that we have ongoing at the moment, and the local lives, the Nordic lifestyle, the sauna, the food, and so forth. So these local authentic experiences are super important in building interest and demand for the destination. But the challenge there is these authentic experiences are typically provided by small and micro companies whose focus and competence is not at all in travel technology or digitalization or AI. Their competence is taking the customers to the nature as it should be. From the destination point of view, we notice that when we Visit Finland, build demand for Finland as a sustainable destination, we need to have the supply as well, right? Because we build demand, then we need to have the sustainable supply as well. And it needs to be in the same channel. Mainly, I think all the destinations are building the demand nowadays in digital channel. So you need to have the supply in the same channel as well, because otherwise, of course, then there's interest, but the conversion doesn't happen. So that's why that was the starting point in my program, that we need to have a catalog of Finland in the digital form. And you can't build that or support that unless you can digitalize the accommodation sector is well digitalized already, as we all know, and airlines and so forth. But tours and activities has not been. It's only been like a few years, I would say. So that's why we wanted to support that, because as said, we wanted to attract people to a sustainable destination that Finland is, but then we need to have the inventory and the digital catalog that we can then drive the interested travelers to. So that was where we started off.
Anis, and maybe Sara has a very first-hand experience on this as well. How do you see then the technology component helping to enable us to better shape tourism flows in the destination? One of the biggest priorities of destinations in terms of strategy is to promote regionality, address seasonality, and to try and drive as much off-season as possible. But we've got, on the one hand, where the demand naturally sits. On the other hand, the businesses, to see the viability, they also need to see that is something that they can sell. That is something that they're going to see the demand for. So how do you see the role of us being able to support that? Destinations, for example, being able to really, really help those businesses that are investing in their product, investing in this kind of different product offer as well that presents something rich and unique. How do you see us being able to really drive that demand and shape that demand so that we move those tourism pressures away from those hotspots?
Well, I can say from the Finland perspective, even though we are a small travel destination, we are a big country. Lapland, which is booming at the moment, it's, I think, over 25% year-on-year growth this year. So we're having all-time high season in some of the Lapland destinations. Very tour operator heavy, very winter heavy destinations. Then in Lakeland of Finland, Land of Thousand Lakes, or in Archipelago, it's a very different destinations. Archipelago is super fragile nature destinations, very minimum accommodation opportunities there. So it's very different. You can't build tour operator demand in these type of destinations. It's very different way on the destinations work. With that said, they all have the topic and the issue with seasonality. It's either winter or summer. And even as I said, we don't suffer overcrowdedness, but we do suffer from this, that the demand is focused solely on 1 or 2 or 3 months. And then that's pretty much it. And it takes a lot of effort even to build the shoulder season, not to mention opening up a new season, which we are now focusing on doing in Lapland, to open up a summer season in Lapland, because we have the midnight sun. And I think it's quite amazing and funny to think in Finland we've been able to brand and sell the extreme coldness and darkness, but not the midnight sun, the eternal sun. So that's what we're focusing at the moment. But it's a huge effort, and that's where I think the experiences comes in a super critical role, because you can't just build the season on few hotels and accessibility, which is super important topic, of course. But you need to attract the interest towards the shoulder seasons or the new seasons with the experiences. What could you do in Lapland in the summer? What's it going to be like? And this is where we try to support the local small businesses in taking the lead and having the inventory available to attract these new audiences to the new seasons. But it's not easy, and it definitely doesn't happen in one season or in 2 seasons either. So it's a risk taking and takes a lot of effort.
It's such an interesting point about risk taking, right? Because it's all about investment and people and businesses investing in sustainable practices, in how they promote their business, in opening up new seasons. And you end up putting a lot of pressure on the businesses themselves in order to invest. And that becomes very difficult because businesses have limited capital. They're SME, often micro businesses that live very hand to mouth. And how do you as an organization enable or help those businesses to invest is a really interesting question. But also throwing it to Sara slightly, as an entity which prides itself on having a very sustainable supply chain, you work with DMCs, but obviously micro suppliers within those supply chains. So you need them to invest or provide information to you to justify or certify your B Corp status. So how do you think about getting that supply chain certified, and how does technology play a role in helping you to measure your environmental impact, and also to the previous question of helping to manage flows and push demand to different destinations or different parts of destinations when you're seeing overcrowding in other parts of destinations?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I think it's a really a unique combination of technology and people power when we try and engage our supply chain, when we ask them about the impacts that they're creating for our measurement and our reporting. We have systems in place to actually capture the information and try and gather it and analyze it. But at the same time, it's so crucial to have people on the ground to actually engage our suppliers and work with them and explain the concepts and do the education that's needed to improve standards and to create the change. And so it's interesting because we're seeing such a growth in technology around sustainability. And I think it's going to be quite transformational in the next few years as AI comes into play and new systems are being built for us to better calculate our emissions, take action in that space, in particular to analyze rights risks, all of these things that global companies are trying, but it doesn't quite at the moment substitute for having people on the ground to understand these risks and opportunities. opportunities. So I think for the foreseeable future, it'll be a bit of both until we can get that technology able to cover both ends. I think also on that other issue around over-tourism and dispersal, again, there's some really exciting work happening, and that's going to come into play more and more. I'll give you an example. We're having a lot of discussions with an organisation called Equator, and they use AI to try and analyse large data sets around over-tourism in certain places. And they overlaid our trips with some of these places, and they're able to give us insights around, okay, this is where over-tourism's happening, and really quite specific customer insights for us to go, this is what we can take from that, and we can actually adapt our product accordingly. I think it's really exciting, this growth that we're seeing in technology and that will play. And it's just going to be a bit of an experimental stage in the next few years around how we actually can utilise that and leverage it in a way that will help us be better.
I think we're definitely going to deep dive on that in just a second, because it's a really, really interesting and rapidly developing area. You touched on two really key things there, AI and sustainability, and the role of technology in that. Before we move on to that, I think one burning question I would have, and it's perhaps something Patrick can also shed a light on, but Sara, you're a commercial business ultimately, and I think certainly from my experience, I'm so used to working with destinations and hearing a bit about their strategies. But as a business, how would you balance the proactivity versus being reactive? I imagine you want to go after where the customer is, and you want to be able to provide what the customer is looking for. On the other hand, when we think about proactivity from a destination point of view, it's actually looking at where the customer isn't. And it's actually saying, how can we drive them here or encourage them to travel in this period? So how do you see the role as a business, the opportunity to try and fill those gaps? Is that seen as an opportunity, and how would you see that?
It's definitely an opportunity, and we're definitely looking at it like that. I think, again, it's so much is around how you story tell to the customer about these challenges and explain the issues. And I think education is a really big part of this conversation. If we are able to get the customer engaged, that goes a long way. There's obviously some limitations, the demand in certain areas, but I think that if you're able to actually deliver a better customer experience with changes that you make on the ground, then you're creating advocates for this within your customer. And so I think there's a huge opportunity. And as we see the multiplication of issues where we've got, for example, in Southern Europe, over summer, you've got the heat, and then you've got the crowds, and then it's this layering of impacts happening, and you might have water issues. Awareness is being raised more, and we're seeing patterns being shifted. People are going in off season, the shoulder season, so we're creating more product around those seasons. So that behaviour is actually being shifted quite quickly in lots of places, and the demand's changing. So I think that will actually increase as we see the impacts of climate change happening more and more, and destinations and tour operators like ourselves will have to adapt quite quickly.
Really interesting. And Patrick, I'd love to come to you in terms of how you think about building products, because a lot of what Sara talked about there is how demand is changing, and as demand changes, you need to be ahead of the curve in terms of product creation, right? Because as demand changes, if you've not got the right product set in order to serve that demand, your destination's ultimately going to fall behind because you've not got the right product set to drive the demand that you need. So in Aruba and your role within Aruba, how do you think about tracking those demand trends? And are you using tools like AI tools to track consumer behavior, consumer search, consumer interest, any other way that you're getting a gauge on what consumers are really looking for?
In Aruba, believe it or not, small island, but we do believe in data. And everything that we do, every decision that we make sure that we sustain it with data, the correct data. So we are constantly looking for different data on different levels. I wanted to say something about being seasonal and looking at seasonal demand or supply coming in or out that both ladies spoke to. In Aruba, we have the luxury position of not really having high or low season anymore. It's basically almost flat. And that is a great position to be in. On the other hand, that also comes with a lot of responsibility in that sense. And how are you going to manage all of that flow coming in, especially when cruise season, that is a season for cruise, hits in October, November, then we see basically our high season become even higher, because on certain days we have an influx of almost 14 to 15,000 people visitors in one day. Actually, 4 to 5 hours, because cruise doesn't stay a very long time. They come in and they go out. So what we're doing from a technology perspective on that sense is we've installed on a few high visited locations people counters. So we have a camera of some kind that registers everybody that passes by. Currently, it's not live, so we have to go physically to the location and count. So on this day, so many people visited this location. So pull out the USB stick, for example. But we are now working, because of the pilot that was successful, we want to take it a step further. And we want this to be live data. So how can we make sure that technology helps us to make sure that we get live data on scene every single moment of the day, so we can eventually guide all of our tour operators and everybody that has a business in tourism knows when, at which moment of the day, the crowds are at a certain location. So it's populated there, or let's go to another one. So we can manage the flow better with data.
I think it's a really interesting opportunity, and a lot of destinations are starting to say, actually, we have this technology available. We have data and signals that we can read across so many different touch points. I love the idea of somebody going to a camera and unplugging the USB and getting back to the office, seeing what happened. But it's great.
It sounds a bit simplistic, but it's not simplistic. It's actually really good, usable data. We now know that on a given day, a certain location has 1,100 people.
Yeah.
For example, how do you get those peak hours down to an even flow? It's the same thing we're doing, speaking to our cruise partners in the business. How can we spread out that weight of that high season for cruise to the summer months, for example, and have less of a burden during the winter months here? And winter here is not winter as in Finland, by the way, just making sure that everybody understands that. And then from a perspective of business development, we stimulate small businesses. We talk a lot about niche and making sure that people understand unique experiences and how to utilize a niche experience towards the visitor coming in, the guest, because everybody does the island tour, everybody does the big ones. They're known and they're easy money and they're easy in and easy out. However, we stimulate through partnerships small entrepreneurs to come up with unique ideas, niche ideas. So what's the next step, and how are you actually utilizing also technology to give a unique experience to your guests? So that's also one of our tasks.
That's a really good example of taking a piece of data and also then being able to identify where there's opportunities from that data and work with the industry and be that kind of network builder, show both the opportunity but also the negative side, the pressure points, which are not good for those providing those experiences if they can't provide those quality experiences. So I think it's definitely about the narrative you can build around that. As we move on to the last part of our discussion today, I'd love to go back to Anis, who I think you've just got such great experience of working with so many small operators. And we talked a bit earlier about we have to convince them to make that investment, convince them that the season or that product or that experience that maybe they have an idea for is actually worth developing. But at the same time, as we become more and more conscious of sustainability, we also know that our visitors are increasingly looking for choices that they know will have a positive impact, that perhaps will actually even go as far as being regenerative in nature. So tell us a little bit about how you see the technology component in this. Is this a barrier? Does it need to be a barrier? Or does it actually help show them opportunities that are perhaps not necessarily there? And especially from your experience, how do you see the role of the destination in being that connector and translator for that?
We do run this program called Sustainable Finland program, which is run by Visit Finland, and it's been extremely successful. It has a super holistic approach on how travel sector, small, medium and large businesses, it has everything covered, how they can develop their business towards more sustainable ways. That is one of the key things that we do in support of the whole travel sector when it comes to reaching this strategic goal of being the most sustainable destination in the world. Then from my perspective, helping the businesses to grow, whether it is to build more revenue to them or open up the new seasons, that's where the destination has a huge role. Because for the small and medium businesses, it's extremely difficult to reach out to new markets or new customers or new segments segments. It needs to be an effort from the whole destination. When it comes to building demand or building accessibility, which is extremely important for destinations like Finland, we are basically an island because we are here in the very northern corner of Europe. Digitalization has a huge role there because reaching the new audiences, OTAs and online tour operators are the modern catalogs for the destination. Some businesses don't like it. They think they want to survive without these big players and do the customer acquisition and branding and selling themselves. And it's fantastic if you can do it. But if you want to grow your business, reach new markets, new segments, you need these big distributors as well. And this is one of the biggest goals that we achieved. We managed to get even these small and medium businesses to get their inventory management systems in place, get their channel managers in place, and start distributing through these big layers. That's definitely one of the sustainable initiatives as well, is to help the businesses to grow sustainably.
So it's definitely also about the economic sustainability.
Yes.
I think sometimes when you talk about the 3 pillars of sustainability, the economic sustainability, certainly I see a lot of neglect to that part of sustainability because it's perhaps misunderstood. It sounds like just growth.
Yeah.
And growth doesn't necessarily sound like a good thing in the context of sustainability. But I think the way you describe it, it's essential that those products, those experiences are commercially viable, especially if we're taking that leap of developing products and experiences which maybe don't have the automatic demand, and they really need that collaborative, completely strategic approach at a destination level to drive interest, to build the connections into the destination, and to build the awareness all the way through to converting them. Really interesting perspective. Maybe turning to Sara, I think turning the sustainability and technology topic on its head. We talked a lot about B Corp, and I'm sure this is a really key aspect of your communication, your brand, your proposition, and also then I imagine the demand from customers, because you talked about it a little bit earlier. It was really interesting. How do you see this landscape evolving in terms of creating transparency and trust through data, through technology, and being able to bring that all the way to the consumer?
Yeah, it's definitely evolving quite quickly. Obviously, in Europe in particular, there's new regulatory requirements coming in around communication and greenwashing, new standards around certifications as well, and the bar needs to be raised around that. I think that they're all really welcome changes that are going to flow through the system. And so for us as a B Corp, it will become more of a marker for standing for sustainability as these changes get implemented. So that's a positive outcome, because I think there's a lot of confusion there at the consumer level around what is actually sustainable and regenerative, and there's a lot of claims and it can be confusing. So these changes are really needed and they're coming in at a good time. As that evolves, hopefully customers will be able to make better choices, and it's really around driving those dollars into businesses that are actually delivering those good outcomes, because once the investment and capital flows into those places, then you're actually creating that market for sustainability and sustainable travel, and then that grows. And that's what we really want to drive. As the systems change, that's what really needs to happen. That long vision and the long game that we need to play is starting to change and starting to happen.
Yeah, and Patrick, from a destination perspective, especially one that I think is well established and quite a mature destination, how is that journey of transformation towards sustainability? I know that Aruba Tourism Authority have done tremendous work in really putting sustainability right at the heart of your focus when it comes to a destination management perspective. How do you then translate that through to the end consumer?
That's a huge question right there. We've indeed been speaking to sustainability for quite some time. And through our research and through the initiatives that we've deployed, we're now shifting towards even greater goals. So that's why I mentioned earlier, how are you responsible? And responsible meaning for your destination. How can you make sure that you conserve your culture, that you conserve your destination, that you conserve your nature? How do you do that? To which partners do you speak? And making sure that it's not all destined for tourism. Understanding the pressure of tourism versus the pressure of nature and everything that comes with it, the whole sustainability discussion. Then how do you prepare your future generations for tourism of the future? How do you work with the students here in different programs that we develop and in different collaborations that we have? How do you work with them and make them understand that tourism is here to stay, especially for this island? but it's not necessarily going to be the same tourism that's driven today's success. How are we going to make sure that the tourism of the future is also something to their benefit and to the benefit of the destination? So all of that thinking is a huge shift. We want to preserve a certain quality. How do we do that? We have, for example, the Aruba Quality Seal. How does that develop for future generations? How are we going to make the niche experiences that I alluded to earlier? We call it the Aruba signature experiences. How are they going to sustain in the long run? And it's not a one-off. So yay, I won a grant by the Aruba Tourism Authority, but my business doesn't sustain the long-term perspective. So there are multiple aspects that we need to take into account, especially from our perspective. And that goes even to how do you cap maybe certain demand? If, for example, cruise tourism is now at 900,000, where do you go? If stayover tourism is at 1.4, 1.5 million, how much do we allow in the future? There's only so much real estate, and what is responsible eventually to keep doing in the long run? So I think this is a question that we can talk about for another hour, to be honest.
Yeah. I think there's some really profound questions there, and it's really a great way to end and perhaps start another conversation at a later date. You really highlight the importance of having those conversations, the educational and deep level understanding that we need to support. We talk a lot about technology, but I think you also show us that not everything can be managed by technology and dynamic pricing and just product on its own. We need to really have the right strategy and the right decision making that sits behind that. Perhaps I'll go back to Craig for a final word on this, because we started with technology, so maybe we should end with technology. Where do you see the opportunities to achieve more sustainable tourism proposition in the future? And where do you see technology and sustainability really converging?
I think we've had far more knowledgeable insights about some of the challenges from the guests that we've had on today. I think what comes out for me from a lot of this is around the standardization of data. So in terms of measuring sustainability, we need to be able to measure the number of guests that are in certain hotspots for Patrick. We need to be able to measure the different impact that the SMEs are having on Intrepid supply chain, how many water bottles, how many cars, how many liters of fuel. And then Anis, in terms of the SMBs, like you need to get those suppliers and those SMBs educated on technology in order to really understand an ecosystem properly. And that's really difficult in such a fragmented market because it takes education, it takes encouragement, it takes investment. And with such a fragmented and difficult market that we all work in, it's going to take a long time to get that standardization of data across the supply chain in order to really understand how to achieve sustainability and then how to promote and build trust with the consumer, which drives their buying decisions. And I think ultimately we can talk a lot about the creation of product and how making sustainable products is really important. But if consumers aren't buying sustainable, or they're not convinced that buying sustainable is worth the extra dollars or it's not of any value, then a lot of the efforts will be somewhat in vain, because the government entities and private or commercial entities are ultimately trying to drive growth of an ecosystem. So I think data standardization is so important, but it's so difficult to achieve. For all of us, I think it's about how do we try and create that very understandable network or ecosystem which give us an idea of the different data that we need in order to measure and influence the ecosystems that we work in. But it's a long and very hard challenge, and when you've got the macroeconomic and political narrative of drill baby drill going on and stuff like that, it makes it even more challenging for businesses and entities like ours to try and encourage sustainability. But really interesting conversation, so thank you very much for being a part of it and contributing your thoughts. It's been fascinating.
Yeah, thanks so much to Sara, to Anis, to Patrick, and of course to Craig. It's been a really great discussion.
Pleasure.
Thank you.